Thank you, everyone, for joining the premiere episode of Voice of ERP. I want to welcome all of our ISM members and all of our chapter partners and also all of our guests to today's program. At this point, I am going to turn the program over to our host, Sam Gupta.
So much, Kathy. And by the way, huge shout out to Kathy as well as ISM for kicking off the series. This is going to be so helpful for the ERP community. This is obviously the first episode that we are hosting as part of the series. The purpose of the series is going to be in bringing the people who are really committed to the ERP industry and big influencers and the CEOs of the ERP company to learn from their personal journeys. So as the first guest, we have an awesome guest here, on the screen, who is from Alox.Online. It's the ERP system. So obviously we'll let him introduce in a second, but I just wanted to give you a rundown of some of the guests that you can expect in the future. And that is going to be, we are going to have in the next month, David Stephens. He is the CEO of Rootstock. Rootstock is the ERP system in Salesforce ecosystem. Then we are going to have Lisa Anderson. She is big influencer in the supply chain as well as ERP community. Then the following month, we are going to have Brian Somers. He writes for Diginomica, again, big influencer in the ERP community. And then we are going to follow up with Lisa Pope. In January, she is the president of Epicor. So this series is going to be so exciting, and I am super excited to host here as well. So before I hand off to Anders for his intro, if you are in the audience, make sure you guys post a lot of questions and comments, because honestly speaking, I don't have any questions prepared. And so I want your help, so make sure you guys post your questions and comments so that I can ask.
I don't have to do it. This is going to be easy.
Exactly. Anders, over to you. Do you want to introduce yourself, who you
are?
Hello,
everybody. My name is Anders Green. I'm the founder of Alox.Online. That's the website, Alox.Online. And it is a full cloud ERP system that is very much like an app that runs in your browser. It's designed for distribution and smaller companies. That's our focus. If you are Ford, if you are Exxon, then you'll call somebody else. So we're for the more independent distributors and retailers. That's our gig. For me, I mean, my background is engineering, but even my first job out of college was doing some accounting stuff way back when. And then I worked at IBM for a while, and then doing some engineering with digital cameras and processing. But then I worked my way back into distribution and doing a lot of fasteners supply and stuff like that. And of course, we're all importing containers and that kind of thing. And we needed to build a tool that really fit that niche. And so that's where I ended up building Alox. And now I'm all wrapped up with Sam and Kathy and this crew. Whew, good Lord.
This is going to be so much fun. Thank you so much, first of all, for finding time to share your insights, Anders. And by the way, quick shout out to, for the guest. We have Karen from Nevada. Thank you so much for joining, Karen. And then we have Lawson from Atlanta. And I don't know if I'm butchering her name, but, that's the best I can do, I guess. Sorry. All right, Anders. So, okay, obviously you have had crazy journey, and I don't know if you have touched on everything that you have done. You have had very dramatic career journey, and there's a lot to learn from it. Obviously, we want to learn from you how you got into the ERP, why ERP in 2022, overall as the business, as the career path, I guess. But overall, how you move from career 1 to career 2. Do you want to paint some more colors there? Why ERP right now?
I can fill in a little bit there, because at the same time that I was doing a lot of my real work, I was also doing a lot of volunteering in off-road racing stuff, which had a strange connection to this, in that I became the national director of an off-road racing group. And what that meant was I also ended up building a full software suite to manage that. And a lot of that philosophy really transferred over because a lot of these smaller events were essentially going through a digital transformation. They were going from we're on paper and nothing to a fully database driven system. And a lot of what you get in that kind of situation is what you have in, like an ERP implementation. You're getting people on board, you're training them, and also every different group that you deal with does things differently. So I don't know if I expect that our folks here in procurement are well, well familiar with the idea that vendor A and vendor B, one of them needs this PO style and one of them only accepts that part number. And every time that you're going through, you're realizing that a very rigid system will not work with everyone that you deal with. And so doing that for 15 years brought that philosophy that it's not, putting a system in place is not bringing a hammer in and pounding everyone into place. It's really getting consensus and molding directions while still being flexible enough to accommodate everybody. And I think that's the reality of business in the same way as it is the reality of getting 150 volunteers going in one direction. So that, I mean, in the middle of that, I also built another accounting system for all those events. So this is maybe my third one that I've built.
Yeah, amazing journey there. And I completely agree with you related to your comment that when you are going to have different vendors, they are probably going to have different requirements overall from the purchase order perspective. And that's what, when you look at the ERP, that's what it is about in serving many different personas, many different user profiles depending upon their need and really able to customize their workflow. That's the intent. But when people look at ERP systems, they are going to be slightly frightened just because of the complexity that ERP brings into the table. And one of the reasons why people are very frightened is because obviously you are looking at very cross-functional integrated workflows, and sometimes that could be way beyond what procurement is going to need or any other functions are going to need. And the audience that we have, they are also going to be in the enterprise space. When they are going to be looking at any of the ERP, for them, ERP is probably SAP. Okay, that's how they like to think. So let's say if they are, and from my experience, when you are looking at ERP selection, it's really designed for a very specific business model. It's really designed for very specific company size. So let's say if you were to advise based on whatever you have designed in your career versus what you have right now, if somebody is going through that selection process, what should be the mindset? How should they be thinking about looking at an ERP?
Well, I like to think that one of the things I come back to all the time is that scale is everything. Scale is going to determine that's maybe the first half of what you're doing is where am I? Do I have one employee? Is it just me? Do I have literally 1,000 people entering purchase orders for my company? Is that the size of this? And how many layers of management are there? What is the approval flow? And that's going to be really different if your company has 20,000 employees versus 50. It's because there's a huge difference between I need to get this form filled out and signed by 3 levels of managers versus Bob, can I put this through? That's totally different. And so it's certainly a mistake to imagine that all of the ERP software spans the whole scale of available solutions. So if you say here's the whole scale of stuff, well, SAP is up here. There's a bunch of solutions that are down, all these different sections, and talking to someone like Sam to get some advice on we're this size, what solutions should we look at? That's pretty critical because in the same way that you can't, fit 20 people in a tiny little Fiat 500, and also putting one dude in like an F450 is not an efficient way to get somewhere. Like you want a solution that is correctly sized. So scale is everything. I'd say that's the first piece that you would want to look at when you're talking about an ERP selection.
Okay, so great point. I think the scale and the size and obviously the industry is going to be a factor there. So thank you so much for doing that. By the way, quick shout out to Susan as well. Susan, thank you so much for joining from Florida. And Bob, if you are in the audience, listen up closely. Okay, so Anders.
Well, Sam, also, I know that one of your favorite most hated things is an ERP that says they are good for everybody, and that's maybe like the biggest red flag is if they say we can do everything, and you're like, oh, that's.
And the challenge is that every ERP can do everything for everybody, right? It's not supposed to be as difficult.
That's right. Yeah, we only need to build one car for everyone. It's going to be great.
Right? Yeah. So, okay. So, for our procurement folks, and since they are not asking the questions, I need to ask for them. Okay. I need to think about, what their challenges are going to be. And one of the challenges that I am going to be forecasting is going to be when they are either pitching for an ERP, pitching for any sort of digital transformation engagement, to their executives. Obviously, it's a very challenging process. It could be very frightening as well, because if you are going to overcome it, you don't know how that is going to come across, to the executive team, to the management team. So let's say if you were to sort of give any sort of advice to them in terms of what steps they should be taking. I'm pretty sure you have done this in the past. You have pushed some of the initiatives when you were doing your racing stuff. I don't know if you were cutting the check for yourself. I don't know how many people can afford to do that. But you need to ask money from somebody, right? So what is the process? I mean, what do these guys want to hear when they are looking to see whether they are going to be cutting the check or not?
I think that definitely falls into two camps. There's one side that they want to know how much the solution costs.
Yep.
And they're very concerned about what that particular number is. And the other group is, I don't even care about that. I just want to have my problem solved. And eventually those two groups need to meet. But there's certainly two different attitudes that we see people coming at that. So I would say for folks in procurement that are maybe unhappy with their current setup, whether it's ERP or not, or who knows what it is, one of the things to consider would be, maybe you go and look for what other solutions are around, and if you're selling up to your boss, part of that is going to have to be, they're going to want to know how much money is this going to make us or save us, or what is it there. Part of that might be, look, maybe this doesn't save us any money, but it is going to increase the speed by X, and it's also going to reduce errors by X. And what that means is we're going to be able to move 20% more orders error-free through the system. And you're like, did we literally save any money in the IT budget column? Maybe not. But did you make the rest of your company more awesome? And is everyone happier? And is retention higher? There's not one dimension that this comes down to, especially when, I think that ERP software, one of the difficulties is ERP. Like, what does that even mean? And I think it's nobody's favorite acronym. But if you really think that this is the software that runs the entire company, if people are generally unhappy with it, that means the whole company is having a bad time when they go to work, right? Like,
exactly.
No one's like, I come into work and I love our ERP. That doesn't happen. But at least if you're like, I go into work and this does what I want and I'm not unhappy with it, that's a huge step up from. So I think there are some metrics that are not literally just the size of the check that you write, that end up being relevant to where you want to get to, maybe.
Okay, amazing insights there. And before I start with my, second question, I guess, or third question or fourth, or whichever I'm on, I cannot keep count, I guess. Big shout out to Scott. Thank you so much for joining from Arizona. And by the way, if you guys have your companies, if you want to put in the name, in the chat box, then I'll be more than happy to shout that out. So make sure you guys are putting your company name or maybe LinkedIn profile as well. Thank you so much. So Anders, one of the comment that you mentioned overall, when you are looking at just one dimension or multiple dimension, what you should be thinking overall when you are looking at the benefits of an ERP. And you mentioned speed is one factor. In my experience, the only dimension that matters is not going to be the dimension that you care for. It's always going to be the dimension that other person who's sitting on the other side of the table, what they care for. And that is something I think it's very hard for some people, especially if you come from very deep negotiation sales background, right? For them, it's just easy just because they have seen it all, but for a lot of people, it might be difficult. So when you look at the speed, now speed could be a very internal factor. IT people might care for that. Some people might care for that, but I don't know if executives are going to be excited about it unless you can tie that with your top line, bottom line. So overall, when you are looking at the negotiation, and by the way, when we look at the procurement people, their incentives are always going to be aligned in saving the cost. And sometimes they are going to be too focused on saving the cost. So obviously they need to look at the holistic picture. So, when they are evaluating any sort of digital transformation engagement, what other factors should they be looking at? And what are the other players that are going to be involved in the negotiations and what they are going to care for?
Yeah, so you're definitely correct that for most people, they're like, but what is it? What problem does it solve for me? And so, like if I'm the boss, if I'm the CEO of the company, it is entirely possible that I do not care whether when you click submit, that goes through in 300 milliseconds
Exactly.
or 700 milliseconds. That will never be the decision that changes whether I buy it or not. Now, as the user, like if you're down in procurement and you're entering that PO, and every time you click a button, you have to wait, you're going to be like, but your boss doesn't have your job, and so that's not on his list. Now, it's certainly possible that it would be that what makes the CEO happy is like, oh, so instead of reviewing every single transaction that gets posted up for approval, I can write a rule and maybe 90% of them get automatically approved, and my job goes down from 90 minutes to 7 minutes. Like he's like, oh yes, this is very efficient. We're definitely going to have to get this. Doesn't care about the rest. So the guy that's the person that's writing the check is very much going to be concerned with what is this doing for him or her, and how is it making their lives easier? And there's a side of that which is does it make the company more money? Sure, that's going to be on everyone's mind. But there's also a can I get my other heads of departments on board on some automatic stuff that maybe we wanted to do and we couldn't before? Does it solve people's problems? So it's never really about the feature set, but it is what problems is it fixing for people. That's my take.
So very interesting. So let's go back in your journey a little bit, and we are going to review Anders, who is, let's say, 25 years old or maybe 20 years old. I don't know when you started your first job, and we are and we are going to see, okay, what kind of mistakes that you had made at that time. And some of the new procurement folks, obviously, they need that insight in terms of what are the areas that they should be focusing on, they should be learning. So, what are some of the things, let's say, if you were to go back and reflect in your journey, what were some of the things that you didn't have at that time? Now you have a lot more wisdom, I guess.
I mean, certainly, I have seen that and this maybe is almost a general approach to evaluating software for business,
Yeah.
and that is that most of the time, the people that build software for business, they're not business people, they are programmers. That is their job, that is their education, that's where they came from. And so there are things that we in business would naturally assume would be supported because that's how the real world is. And a programmer might never even conceive of that. I'll give you an example. A system that I came across a while back that the partner of mine was working with. They had inventory come in, and inventory showed up, sitting there on the warehouse stock, and they go to receive it. This is right when they had started using their stuff, and the system had no ability to receive only a partial PO. They ordered 14 different items, 9 of them showed up, and then the other 5 were back ordered. The system could only receive the entire thing. And you would think, but of course that happens all the time, that you get sent only a portion of what you ordered, or things come in 2 shipments, or they were back ordered, or they didn't get filled, or they got just dropped off the list, or obsoleted. So many things can happen where you're like, it didn't show up. But a programmer is like, well, you ordered 20, and so when the 20 show up, just tell us and we'll put it in. You're like, only 18 showed up. That was the end of it. And the other 2 are never going to be built. So that's certainly one area to dive into, as especially as procurement folks. So you're deep in the technicalities of some of this. Is some of the things that you need to do may not actually be the forefront of what this thing was built for. And again, it depends what kind of industry it is. So if you selected an ERP that is for this industry, and you are in this industry, and these guys are telling you, oh, it's totally going to work. You're like, well, maybe, but those guys don't even ship the same way. Everything is 3PL or whatever. And you might have a very different scenario. So I'd say that part of that is, go pretty deep into your particular requirements, because otherwise it's going to be customization and expense and heartburn.
Okay, going deep into the requirements, that's very interesting, because most of the businesses that I personally know, they just don't like to go deep. They want to jump directly on coding.
Well, that's what we all want to do.
Right? That's fun stuff.
It does everything, right? It does everything. Just tell me
right?
it does everything, I'll write you the check.
So jumping onto the coding right away, and obviously you have a lot of background, from IBM perspective. And we were discussing about a book that you had read. I don't know if you remember the name of that. They talk about the complexity of software development. If you look at 2022 right now, everybody's sort of trying to commercialize this idea that everybody should be coding, everybody should know programming, which is great. But when you look at the enterprise development, right, and especially when we look at the procurement folks, obviously a lot of people are sort of diving into the code. But I don't know if they really understand the requirement piece is going to be super critical, because unless you have that process state down, unless you have that requirement state down, understanding the roles and responsibilities of each of the systems and how they are going to be interacting with each other, it's going to be really, really hard for the enterprise workflow to be able to work. So even if you might create some sort of siloed code, that is still going to be very siloed experience. You might have vendors sitting in 5 different places. So you are still going to have the similar challenges. So let's say the people who are thinking about, okay, I should be learning code because I don't like my IT. They never deliver business results to us. So what would be your take on that? What advice are you going to have for them in terms of thinking about processes, documenting, learning, about documenting the process? Do you have any sort of advice for these guys who are sort of getting the taste of code?
Sure. So I can tell you this. I've got a young daughter, and she writes code in block format on Scratch.io, which is an MIT website, right? And it has loops, it has while statements, if statements, and you can make little games, and that's great. She could do it, is she ready to write code that runs a business? And the answer is no. Um, and there's certainly a lot of touted as no code or low code solutions that are available. But what is not there is still that there is a vast amount of background knowledge that goes into this profession. And this is like, it would be like I say, look, if I said, look, here's a wrench there, and here's a set of wrenches, and I gave them to you, Sam, and I said, all right, now replace that transmission. Like the wrenches, you know that you just put it on and turn, right? That's how a wrench works. But that doesn't give you the background in everything else that you need to do that job. So there are complications, like you sign up for a no code or low code solution, and then you're like, well, okay, who's thinking about maybe the data security? Who's backing up that data? How do you deploy that across your company? Where's the, maybe the single sign-on aspect of that? So, I'm not saying, don't do that or it doesn't work. It does and it can, but it's certainly, it's much better for internal tools if you want to put something together for that. And sometimes when the IT guys say no, you can't do that, it's because there's a really good reason why you shouldn't. So, going on and doing a no code something yourself isn't always the greatest idea. So I would still want to have some people with some real deep technical knowledge before I jumped into a low code, no code thing myself. Who knows where that data is? There's plenty of issues that you'd want to address before you put critical or sensitive or even just data you wouldn't want to be public out there.
Yeah, and I was thinking about wrench, I guess, that never works for me. It always works for Anders. I don't know, when I look at Anders, he can always figure this out. But wrench, it never worked for me. So again, what you see sometimes, people might have a lot of experience, and it might be easier for them just because they have been practicing that for a while. But that does not mean that you can pick it up right away. So the experience matters a lot. On that note, when I'm looking at your experience, let's say if you were to reflect on some of the learnings that you have had based on the mistakes that you may have made. I don't know if you're comfortable sharing any of those for people if they might be early in their career, any sort of mistakes.
Well, certainly I could say that one mistake would be trying to compete with somebody else where you're never going to win that battle, right? You're like, maybe I spent the weekend and I came up with a great new soda taste. And I've got my soda stream custom flavor and it's amazing. And Anders sarsaparilla, I should not try to take on Coca-Cola. That would be ridiculous. It doesn't matter how awesome my logo is or whatever. That's never going to work because they have the distribution. Now, can I absolutely dominate, the local farmers market with Anders sarsaparilla? Maybe I can. Could I go down to Belize and set up a franchise? Maybe I can, but I'm not going to take on Coca-Cola. So it's certainly knowing what you're doing and where the value that you're bringing really fits is important because life is short and we all want to do good stuff for people, but you don't need to try to do good stuff in an area that you won't have an impact. So I think finding your niche and following it certainly is a mistake that I've made, fixed, and continued. But it's still just so attractive, and so you gotta stay vigilant on that one.
Yeah, it's always very attractive when other people are doing it. And I completely agree that, if you're not into racing, don't try that. If you're not into deadlifts, don't try that. If you're not into ERP, don't try that. Compete with yourself and don't compete with others. So I think that's a great advice. Thank you so much for that. Now, let's talk about some of the myths that we have in the ERP industry. I don't know if you have come across any of them. Do you want to, outline some of them, the ones that you have come across, and that just, it's like, okay, what is that again? So some of the myths.
Certainly, I think that one myth could be the cloud fixes everything.
Good one.
And Alox is cloud software. That's the way we do it. But that still doesn't mean that just the cloud is a magic. It's not a magic cloud. The cloud is just someone else's computer somewhere. That's what it is. So there's plenty of buzzwords in ERP just because enterprise resource planning. We are solidly into corporate buzzword territory. Cloud is certainly on that list. So cloud fixes everything, I think would definitely be one of those myths. It's a great solution for a lot of reasons, but that doesn't mean that on-prem is never the solution. If you had, medical data that was highly sensitive, and you're also storing like X-rays and imaging that's bandwidth intensive, you don't want that to go to the cloud all the time. That you'd be spending days waiting for it to move across. So that'd be my number one. What do you got for number two? What you take the next round?
So for me, the myth you are talking about, Anders, you are asking me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so ERP myth, there are a lot of them. So I think you have already covered the cloud. Then I guess the second one I am going to call out from this episode itself. And, sometimes ERP does mean enterprise resource planning, which is supposed to mean that enterprise. It also means that it is supposed to do anything for everyone, but then businesses are probably going to have 10 or 15, sometimes 5 different systems, because the best of breed systems are probably going to play a role in your architecture. So there is a place for everything. There is a place for other systems as well, but do not forget your architecture. Your architecture is probably going to be very important. What other myths? Do you want to take the next one?
Sure. I think that another one could be that maybe that ERP is only for huge businesses because
Yep.
it's so expensive, or maybe those are two or together. Just it's in my mind, one of the key pieces of ERP is that it is rigorous. And what I mean by that is there's certainly plenty of smaller software that's available that is fully functional for home use or your Etsy store or whatever. But you can delete transactions, things aren't traceable, you can adjust quantities out the wazoo, and that's sort of like, yeah, you can balance a checkbook in it, but is it rigorously watching costs and lots and inventories and tracking dates and all? No, it doesn't do that. But I think there are many businesses, even smaller ones, that would benefit from that rigor. And if you ask the boss at the top, hey, do you want us to precisely track these costs? That person is going to say, yes, I do want you to do that. And they're like, well, what do we need to do that? Some kind of inventory tracking. You're like, well, what you need is called ERP. That's the thing that you need. And I think a lot of people maybe avoid it as a big monster, but I think it's the rigorous nature of the math involved is maybe one of the key aspects of what ERP is. And so is that too expensive? I don't know. Is losing half your warehouse too expensive? Right?
Exactly. That is so true. And I'm actually going to take the next one. But before that, Anna, thank you so much for joining. Anna, I don't know how you pronounce your name either, but thank you so much for joining. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment box. So the next one I am going to take, and that's related to the myth, is going to be, I think a lot of businesses think that, if they are buying any sort of enterprise software, and it has nothing to do with ERP. It could be P2P, it could be any other sourcing software. Their assumption is going to be that, you know what, if I'm buying a package software, I can simply pull it from the shelf and it's going to work magically for me. Typically, in any software development process, you are going to have phases, and those phases are divided in terms of the effort. Typically, you are going to have something called a requirement phase. Okay, then you are going to have something called a design phase. Sure, you can take a little iterative approach. You don't have to, let's say, do requirement for 5 months and then figure out, how to do design, but you cannot really afford to skip these steps. Okay, irrespective of whether you take the iterative approach or you are doing everything right away. So requirement, design, then you are going to have some sort of implementation, then testing, and then probably deployment, maintenance, whatever. So these are overarching phases that you are going to have in any of the software development. Now, irrespective of whether you're buying a software or building a software, the requirement phase is going to be equally critical. And one of the myths that we have in the market is going to be, hey, I am buying the software. I am hiring the most awesome consultant called Anders Green, and he is going to fix all the problems magically for me. That's not going to happen. Okay, irrespective of how awesome Anders may be. So do not skip those phases. So that is going to be my fourth one. Do you have fifth one by any chance?
Well, I would add to that certainly the requirements gathering is nobody's favorite.
Exactly.
And everyone's like, do we have to do that? And I think maybe one way to think about that is, if you hired a new person to come into your business, you would reasonably expect, well, we're going to have to spend a couple of weeks training them on how we do this, and this is where you get to that activity, and when you get to this section, make sure that you have these approved by this manager or whatever. Like, so if you have to do a couple of weeks of training a new person on your workflow, then you should imagine that our workflow is custom enough that it requires training. That means that obviously not every other business does it exactly like you. So that would follow that if it requires training, then you're going to have to document what that is so that the people that are doing software can set it up to work that way, right? Because it's not universal. There's no two businesses that are like, yes, we always check box A and then we have box B checked. Like it's different. So consider that when you're thinking about it. If you have to train people, then it follows that it's complicated enough that you got to document it when you go build these things.
Okay, so the other thing that I am going to add, I think we are done with the different myths. I think that's enough for today. Then we will be covering some more in the next session as well. So when you think about testing, okay, and obviously when you look at any of the practitioners, whether you are talking about marketing, procurement, if you are not from the software development background, thinking like a tester is very difficult in general. And when I personally review the test cases of some people who might not have as much testing background, I know how much they have missed and what problems they are going to face. I'm pretty sure you can do the same as well, Anders, right? And there is a coaching process. When I look at a person who is, let's say, 5 years experience in software development or ERP, their quality of testing is going to be very different than a person who's going to have 20 years of experience, right? So what are some of the tips that you can share when they are thinking about writing the right test cases?
Well, one thing is that I would divide sort of in my mind the testing almost into two pieces, and one of it is the first step is is this working how I expect it to as the system stands using this new system? And generally, it got built, it's the software was tested at the factory, it's going to do what it's supposed to do. But the second half of that, which I think is much requires maybe more imagination and time and everything, is legacy data. Yeah. And so if you are bringing in legacy data from the past, then there is probably going to be some subset of functionality that does not work and maybe can't work. And there's a lot of technical database reasons why. Some things may not be affordable, whatever. But an example might be like you bring in all of your old purchase orders and you can print them and that works, but maybe you can't like recalculate landed cost. Or there may be other pieces where you've brought in a bunch of data, but it doesn't have all the connected pieces. So you're testing test cases. You really have to do maybe two places. Like for new stuff that I put in, is this working the way I expect it to? And for the old data that I've brought in, where does it fall down? And am I okay with that? Or do I need to bring in more data to make it work? Or am I comfortable with it's fine? Because it certainly could be the case where you're like, we can at least see all the old POs. That's fine. And if we need to get that particular piece of detail, which we need like 2 times a year, we can just look in the old system and it doesn't matter. So that's the thing, is testing is new stuff versus old stuff, I think is 2 different mindsets.
Okay, amazing. So we have a comment from the audience, and I'm simply going to read it. And then if you have any sort of build up there, then Anders, you can comment there as well. So I think Susan is agreeing about the analogy of looking at bringing on a new software program as like bringing on a new employee. I think that's a great one, to be honest. Okay, so you have to go through the same process, the way you are going to be defining your job description when you are hiring an employee, the way you are going to be training an employee. You have to train the software as well. Okay, much more training okay, than an employee, because employee is going to be focusing only just one aspect. The ERP is going to be focusing on the entire enterprise, so you have to train that. It's a great way to have people think about it and get on board with the ramp up needs. Amazing comment, Susan. Thank you so much for that. So Anders, we are coming close to our time right now. So we have roughly 3 minutes. So there are 2 or 3 things that we can do. Number one, obviously, we want to learn how people can reach out to you if they want to learn more about Alox or about your racing, stunts.
Sure. If they want to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn. If you look for Anders Green, I'll be there. If you want to find our software, that's Alox.Online is the URL. And there's certainly info there. But those are the 2 easiest ways. Or you could email me, anders@alox.email. So that's those 3 ways. There's more than enough ways to get in touch with me.
Okay, and do you have any sort of prediction for ERP, what people should be watching for? Let's say if they are looking for 2023, 2024, and any sort of closing advice?
Well, I certainly I see a trend in the industry that more and more companies are going toward cloud native, and so that's probably likely to continue, just because it's a pretty decent financial model. So if you like on-prem deployments, hold on to the one you have, might be my advice there. So that's a prediction I would make. I also see that there's probably going to be more and more companies using this kind of technology simply because it is more available and there's more information getting out about it. So I think an expansion of the use of it, whereas before maybe people thought that's only for Fortune 100 companies. And now you're like, no, there's a lot of other people that can get into it at different scales. So those are my 2 predictions.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Anders. Really appreciate your time and insights today. So that's it for today, guys. And we are going to be coming back with our next guest, who is going to be David Stephens from Rootstock next month as part of the series. And before we close, I'm actually going to introduce myself as well, because Kathy is going to be so mad on me if I don't introduce myself. Okay, if you don't know me, if you're seeing me for the first time, I'm Sam Gupta, host of WBSRocks is the podcast. So make sure, if you guys have not checked out, check that. We have guests like Anders there who are always appearing on our panels, as well as on the podcast itself, as well as if you want to check our business, that's ElevatIQ. ElevatIQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. On that note, thanks once again, everyone, for joining today.